Growing up in a school. My mother started school when she was 6 and stopped the same term. She was unusual in the village as she had a father and brothers who encouraged her to go to school. She was the only girl in a class of boys. She carried her bag of books proudly into school and claimed she was brighter than the boys. But every day she would leave behind her girl cousins playing at home, and she envied them. There seemed no point in going to school just to end up cooking, cleaning, and bringing up children. So, one day she sold her books for 9 annas, spent the money on boiled sweets, and never went back. Her father said nothing. She says he didn't even notice, as he would set off early every morning after a breakfast of cornbread and cream, his German pistol strapped under his arm, and spend his days busy with local politics or resolving feuds. Besides, he had 7 other children to think about. It was only when she met my father that she felt regret. Here was a man who had read so many books, who wrote her poems she could not read, and whose ambition was to have his own school. As his wife, she wanted to help him achieve that. For as long as my father could remember, it had been his dream to open a school. But with no family contacts or money, it was extremely hard for him to realize this dream. He thought there was nothing more important than knowledge. He remembered how mystified he had been by the river in his village, wondering where the water came from and went to, until he learned about the water cycle from the rain to the sea. His own village school had been just a small building. Many of his classes were taught under a tree, on the bare ground. There were no toilets, and the pupils went to the fields to answer the call of nature. Yet he says he was actually lucky. His sisters, my aunts, did not go to school at all. Just like millions of girls in my country, education had been a great gift for him. He believed that lack of education was the root of all Pakistan's problems. Ignorance allowed politicians to fool people and bad administrators to be re-elected. He believed schooling should be available for all, rich and poor, boys and girls. The school that my father dreamed of would have desks and a library, computers, bright posters on the walls, and, most important, washrooms. My grandfather had a different dream for his youngest son. He longed for him to be a doctor, and, as one of just 2 sons, he expected him to contribute to the household budget. My father's elder brother Said Ramzan had worked for years as a teacher at a local school. He and his family lived with my grandfather, and whenever he saved up enough of his salary, they built a small concrete hujra at the side of the house for guests. He brought logs back from the mountains for firewood, and after teaching, he would work in the fields where our family had a few buffaloes. He also helped Baba with heavy tasks like clearing snow from the roof. When my father was offered a place for his A-levels at Jahanzeb College, which is the best further education institution in Swat, my grandfather refused to pay for his living expenses. His own education in Delhi had been free. He had lived like a talib in the mosques, and local people had provided the students with food and clothes. Tuition at Jahanzeb was free, but my father needed money to live on. Pakistan doesn't have student loans, and he had never even set foot in a bank. The college was in Saidu Sharif, the twin town of Mingora, and he had no family there with whom he could stay. There was no other college in Shangla, and if he didn't go to college, he would never be able to move out of the village and realize his dream. My father was at his wits' end and wept with frustration. His beloved mother had died just before he graduated from school. He knew if she had been alive, she would have been on his side. He pleaded with his father, but to no avail. His only hope was his brother-in-law in Karachi. My grandfather suggested that he might take my father in so he could go to college there. The couple would soon be arriving in the village, as they were coming to offer condolences after my grandmother's death. My father prayed they would agree, but my grandfather asked them as soon as they arrived, exhausted after the 3-day bus journey, and his son-in-law refused outright. My grandfather was so furious he would not speak to them for their entire stay. My father felt he had lost his chance and would end up like his brother, teaching in a local school. The school where Uncle Khan Dada taught was in the mountain village of Sur, about an hour and a half's climb from their house. It didn't even have its own building. They used the big hall in the mosque, where they taught more than 100 children ranging from 5 to 15 years old. The people in Sur were Gujars, Kahistanis, and Mians. We regard Mians as noble or landed people, but Gujars and Kahistanis are what we call hilly people, peasants who look after buffaloes. Their children are usually dirty, and they are looked down upon by Pashtuns, even if they are poor themselves. They are dirty, black and stupid, people would say. Let them be illiterate. It is often said that teachers don't like to be posted to such remote schools and generally make a deal with their colleagues so that only one of them has to go to work each day. If the school has 2 teachers, each goes in for 3 days and signs the other in. If it has 3 teachers, each goes in for just 2 days. Once there, all they do is keep the children quiet with a long stick, as they cannot imagine education will be any use to them. My uncle was more dutiful. He liked the hilly people and respected their tough lives, so he went to the school most days and actually tried to teach the children. After my father had graduated from school, he had nothing to do, so he volunteered to help his brother. There his luck changed. Another of my aunts had married a man in that village, and they had a relative visiting called Nasser Pacha, who saw my father at work. Nasser Pacha had spent years in Saudi Arabia working in construction, making money to send back to his family. My father told him he had just finished school and had won a college place at Jahanzeb. He did not mention he could not afford to take it, as he did not want to embarrass his father. "Why don't you come and live with us?" asked Nasser Pacha. "Oof, I was so happy. By God," says my father. Pacha and his wife Jajai became his second family. Their home was in Spalbandi, a beautiful mountain village on the way to the White Palace, and my father describes it as a romantic and inspirational place. He went there by bus, and it seemed so big to him compared to his home village that he thought he'd arrived in a city. As a guest, he was treated exceptionally well. Jajai replaced his late mother as the most important woman in my father's life. When a villager complained to her that he was flirting with a girl living across the road, she defended him. "Ziauddin is as clean as an egg with no hair," she said. "Look instead to your own daughter." It was in Spalbandi that my father came across women who had great freedom and were not hidden away as in his own village. The women of Spalbandi had a beautiful spot on top of the mountain where only they could congregate to chat about their everyday lives. It was unusual for women to have a special place to meet outside the home. It was also there that my father met his mentor Akbar Khan, who, although he had not gone to college himself, lent my father money so he could. Like my mother, Akbar Khan may not have had much of a formal education, but he had another kind of wisdom. My father often spoke of the kindness of Akbar Khan and Nasser Pacha to illustrate that if you help someone in need, you might also receive unexpected aid. My father arrived at college at an important moment in Pakistan's history. That summer, while he was walking in the mountains, our dictator General Zia was killed in a mysterious plane crash, which many people said was caused by a bomb hidden in a crate of mangoes. During my father's first term at college, national elections were held, which were won by Benazir Bhutto, daughter of the Prime Minister who had been executed when my father was a boy. Benazir was our first female Prime Minister and the first in the Islamic world. Suddenly there was a lot of optimism about the future. Student organizations which had been banned under Zia became very active. My father quickly got involved in student politics and became known as a talented speaker and debater. He was made General Secretary of the Pakhtun Students' Federation, PSF, which wanted equal rights for Pashtuns. The most important jobs in the army, bureaucracy, and government are all taken by Punjabis because they come from the biggest and most powerful province. The other main student organization was Islami Jamaat-e Talaba, the student wing of the religious party Jamaat-e Islami, which was powerful in many universities in Pakistan. They provided free textbooks and grants to students but held deeply intolerant views, and their favorite pastime was to patrol universities and sabotage music concerts. The party had been close to General Zia and done badly in the elections. The president of the students' group in Jahanzeb College was Ihsanul Haq Haqqani. Though he and my father were great rivals, they admired each other and later became friends. Haqqani says he is sure my father would have been president of the PSF and become a politician if he had been from a rich Khan family. Student politics was all about debating and charisma, but party politics required money. One of their most heated debates in that first year was over a novel. The book was called The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie, and it was a parody of the Prophet's life set in Bombay. Muslims widely considered it blasphemous, and it provoked so much outrage that it seemed people were talking of little else. The odd thing was no one had even noticed the publication of the book to start with. It wasn't actually on sale in Pakistan, but then a series of articles appeared in Urdu newspapers by a mullah close to our intelligence service, berating the book as offensive to the Prophet and saying it was the duty of good Muslims to protest. Soon mullahs all over Pakistan were denouncing the book, calling for it to be banned, and angry demonstrations were held. The most violent took place in Islamabad on 12 February 1989. When American flags were set alight in front of the American Center, even though Rushdie and his publishers were British. Police fired into the crowd, and 5 people were killed. The anger wasn't just in Pakistan. 2 days later, Ayatollah Khomeini, the supreme leader of Iran, issued a fatwa calling for Rushdie's assassination. My father's college held a heated debate in a packed room. Many students argued that the book should be banned and burned, and the fatwa upheld. My father also saw the book as offensive to Islam, but believes strongly in freedom of speech. First, let's read the book, and then why not respond with our own book, he suggested. He ended by asking in a thundering voice my grandfather would have been proud of, is Islam such a weak religion that it cannot tolerate a book written against it? Not my Islam. For the first few years after graduating from Jahanzeb, my father worked as an English teacher in a well-known private college, but the salary was low, just 1,600 rupees a month, around 12 pounds, and my grandfather complained he was not contributing to the household. It was also not enough for him to save for the wedding he hoped for to his beloved Tor Pekai. One of my father's colleagues at the school was his friend Muhammad Niam Khan. He and my father had studied for their bachelor's and master's degrees in English together, and were both passionate about education. They were also both frustrated as the school was very strict and unimaginative. Neither the students nor the teachers were supposed to have their own opinions, and the owner's control was so tight they even frowned upon friendship between teachers. My father longed for the freedom that would come with running his own school. He wanted to encourage independent thought and hated the way the school he was at rewarded obedience above open-mindedness and creativity. So when Niam lost his job after a dispute with the college administration, they decided to start their own school. Their original plan was to open a school in my father's village of Shopper, where there was a desperate need, like a shop in a community where there are no shops, he said. But when they went there to look for a building, there were banners everywhere advertising a school opening. Someone had beaten them to it, so they decided to set up an English language school in Mingora, thinking that since Swat was a tourist destination, there would be a demand for learning in English. As my father was still teaching, Niam wandered the streets looking for somewhere to rent. One day he called my father excitedly to say he'd found the ideal place. It was the ground floor of a 2-story building in a well-off area called Landikas, with a walled courtyard where students could gather. The previous tenants had also run a school, the Ramada School. The owner had called it that because he had once been to Turkey and seen a Ramada hotel, but the school had gone bankrupt, which perhaps should have made them think twice. Also, the building was on the banks of a river, where people threw their rubbish, and it smelt foul in hot weather. My father went to see the building after work. It was a perfect night with stars and a full moon just above the trees, which he took to be a sign. I felt so happy, he recalls. My dream was coming true. Niam and my father invested their entire savings of 60,000 rupees. They borrowed 30,000 rupees more to repaint the building, rented a shack across the road to live in, and went from door to door, trying to find students. Unfortunately, the demand for English tuition turned out to be low, and there were unexpected drains on their income. My father's involvement in political discussions continued. After college, every day his fellow activists came to the shack or the school for lunch. "We can't afford all this entertaining," Niam would complain. It was also becoming clear that while they were best friends, they found it hard to work as business partners. On top of that, there was a stream of guests from Shangla, now that my father had a place for them to stay. We Pashtuns cannot turn away relatives or friends, however inconvenient. We don't respect privacy, and there is no such thing as making an appointment to see someone. Visitors can turn up whenever they wish and can stay as long as they want. It was a nightmare for someone trying to start a business, and it drove Niam to distraction. He joked to my father that if either of them had relatives to stay, they should pay a fine. My father kept trying to persuade Niam's friends and family to stay so he could be fined too. After 3 months, Niam had had enough. "We are supposed to be collecting money in enrollment fees. Instead, the only people knocking on our doors are beggars. This is a Herculean task, he added. I can't take any more. By this time, the two former friends were hardly speaking to each other and had to call in local elders to mediate. My father was desperate not to give up the school, so agreed to pay Niem a return on his share of the investment. He had no idea how. Fortunately, another old college friend called. Hidayatullah stepped in and agreed to put up the money and take Niem's place. The new partners again went from door to door, telling people they had started a new kind of school. My father is so charismatic that Hidayatullah says he is the kind of person who, if invited to your house, will make friends with your friends. But while people were happy to talk to him, they preferred to send their children to established schools. They named it the Kushal School after one of my father's great heroes, Kushal Khan Khattak, the warrior poet from Akora just south of Swat, who tried to unify all Pashtun tribes against the Mughals. In the 17th century, near the entrance they painted a motto, "We are committed to build for you the call of the new era." My father also designed a shield with a famous quote from Khattak in Pashto. I girt my sword in the name of Afghan honor. My father wanted us to be inspired by our great hero, but in a manner fit for our times with pens, not swords. Just as Khattak had wanted the Pashtuns to unite against a foreign enemy, so we needed to unite against ignorance. Unfortunately, not many people were convinced. When the school opened, they had just 3 students. Even so, my father insisted on starting the day in style by singing the national anthem. Then, his nephew Aziz, who had come to help, raised the Pakistan flag. With so few students, they had little money to equip the school and soon ran out of credit. Neither man could get any money from their families, and Hidayatullah was not pleased to discover that my father was still in debt to lots of people from college, so they were always receiving letters demanding money. There was worse in store when my father went to register the school. After being made to wait for hours, he was finally ushered into the office of a superintendent of schools, who sat behind towering piles of files surrounded by hangers on drinking tea. "What kind of school is this?" asked the official, laughing at his application. "How many teachers do you have?" 3. Your teachers are not trained. Everyone thinks they can open a school just like that. The other people in the office laughed along, ridiculing him. My father was angry. It was clear the superintendent wanted money. Pashtuns cannot stand anyone belittling them, nor was he about to pay a bribe for something he was entitled to. He and Hidayatullah hardly had money to pay for food, let alone bribes. The going rate for registration was about 13,000 rupees, more if they thought you were rich, and schools were expected to treat officials regularly to a good lunch of chicken or trout from the river. The education officer would call to arrange an inspection, then give a detailed order for his lunch. My father used to grumble, "We're a school, not a poultry farm." So when the official angled for a bribe, my father turned on him with all the force of his years of debating. "Why are you asking all these questions?" he demanded. "Am I in an office, or am I in a police station or a court? Am I a criminal?" He decided to challenge the officials to protect other school owners from such bullying and corruption. He knew that to do this he needed some power of his own, so he joined an organization called the SWAT Association of Private Schools. It was small in those days, just 15 members, and my father quickly became vice president. The other principals took paying bribes for granted, but my father argued that if all the schools joined together they could resist. Running a school is not a crime, he told them. Why should you be paying bribes? You are not running brothels, you are educating children. Government officials are not your bosses, he reminded them. They are your servants. They are taking salaries and have to serve you. You are the ones educating their children. He soon became president of the organization and expanded it until it included 400 principals. Suddenly the school owners were in a position of power. But my father has always been a romantic rather than a businessman, and in the meantime he and Hidayatullah were in such desperate straits that they ran out of credit with the local shopkeeper and could not even buy tea or sugar. To try and boost their income, they ran a tuck shop at school, going off in the mornings and buying snacks to sell to the children. My father would buy maize and stay up late at night making and bagging popcorn. I would get very depressed and sometimes collapse seeing the problems all around us, said Hidayatullah. But when Ziauddin is in a crisis he becomes strong and his spirits high. My father insisted that they needed to think big. One day Hidayatullah came back from trying to enroll pupils to find my father sitting in the office talking about advertising with the local head of Pakistan TV. As soon as the man had gone, Hidayatullah burst into laughter. Ziauddin, we don't even have a TV, he pointed out. If we advertise, we won't be able to watch it. But my father is an optimistic man and never deterred by practicalities. One day my father told Hidayatullah he was going back to his village for a few days. He was actually getting married, but he didn't tell any of his friends in Mingora as he could not afford to entertain them. Our weddings go on for several days of feasting. In fact, as my mother often reminds, my father, he was not present for the actual ceremony. He was only there for the last day, when family members held a Quran and a shawl over their heads, and held a mirror for them to look into. For many couples in arranged marriages, this is the first time they see each other's faces. A small boy was brought to sit on their laps to encourage the birth of a son. It is our tradition for the bride to receive furniture or perhaps a fridge from her family and some gold from the groom's family. My grandfather would not buy enough gold, so my father had to borrow more money to buy bangles. After the wedding, my mother moved in with my grandfather and my uncle. My father returned to the village every 2 or 3 weeks to see her. The plan was to get his school going then. Once it was successful, send for his wife, but Baba kept complaining about the drain on his income and made my mother's life miserable. She had a little money of her own, so they used it to hire a van, and she moved to Mingora. They had no idea how they would manage. We just knew my father didn't want us there, said my father. At that time I was unhappy with my family, but later I was grateful as it made me more independent. He had, however, neglected to tell his partner. Hidayatullah was horrified when my father returned to Mingora with a wife. We're not in a position to support a family, he told my father. Where will she live? It's okay, replied my father. She will cook and wash for us. My mother was excited to be in Mingora. To her it was a modern town. When she and her friends had discussed their dreams as young girls by the river, most had just said they wanted to marry and have children and cook for their husbands. When it was my mother's turn, she said, I want to live in the city and be able to send out for kebabs and naan instead of cooking it myself. However, life wasn't quite what she expected. The shack had just 2 rooms, one where Hidayatullah and my father slept and one which was a small office. There was no kitchen, no plumbing. When my mother arrived, Hidayatullah had to move into the office and sleep on a hard wooden chair. My father consulted my mother on everything. Pekai, help me resolve my confusion on this is, he would say. She even helped whitewash the school walls, holding up the lanterns so they could paint. When the light went off in power cuts, Ziauddin was a family man, and they were unusually close, said Hidayatullah. While most of us can't live with our wives, he couldn't be without his. Within a few months my mother was expecting. Their first child, born in 1995, was a girl and stillborn. I think there was some problem with hygiene in that muddy place, says my father. I assumed women could give birth without going to hospital, as my mother and my sisters had in the village. My mother gave birth to 10 children in this way. The school continued to lose money. Months would pass and they could not pay the teachers' wages or the school rent. The goldsmith kept coming and demanding his money for my mother's wedding bangles. My father would make him good tea and offer him biscuits in the hope that would keep him satisfied. Hidayatullah laughed. You think he will be happy with tea? He wants his money. The situation became so dire that my father was forced to sell the gold bangles. In our culture, wedding jewelry is a bond between the couple. Often women sell their jewelry to help set up their husbands in business or to pay their fares to go abroad. My mother had already offered her bangles to pay for my father's nephew to go to college, which my father had rashly promised to fund. Fortunately, my father's cousin Jihan Sher Khan had stepped in, and she did not realize the bangles were only partly paid for. She was then furious when she learned that my father did not get a good price for them. Just when it seemed matters could not get worse, the area was hit by flash floods. There was a day when it did not stop raining, and in the late afternoon there was a warning of flooding. Everyone had to leave the district. My mother was away, and Hidayatullah needed my father to help him move everything up to the first floor, safe from the fast-rising waters, but he couldn't find him anywhere. He went outside, shouting, Ziauddin, Ziauddin. The search almost cost Hidayatullah his life. The narrow Street outside the school was totally flooded, and he was soon up to his neck in water. There were live electric cables hanging loose and swaying in the wind. He watched paralyzed with fear as they almost touched the water. Had they done so, he would have been electrocuted. When he finally found my father, he learned that he had heard a woman crying that her husband was trapped in their house and he had rushed in to save him. Then he helped them save their fridge. Hidayatullah was furious. "You saved this woman's husband, but not your own house," he said. Was it because of the cry of a woman? When the waters receded, they found their home and school destroyed, their furniture, carpets, books, clothes, and the audio system entirely caked in thick, foul-smelling mud. They had nowhere to sleep and no clean clothes to change into. Luckily, a neighbor called Mr. Aman ud-Din took them in for the night. It took them a week to clear the debris. They were both away when, 10 days later, there was a second flood and the building again filled with mud. Shortly afterwards, they had a visit from an official of WAPDA, the water and power company, who claimed their meter was rigged and demanded a bribe. When my father refused, a bill arrived with a large fine. There was no way they could pay this, so my father asked one of his political friends to use his influence. It started to feel as though the school was not meant to be, but my father would not give up on his dreams so easily. Besides, he had a family to provide for. I was born on 12 July 1997. My mother was helped by a neighbor who had delivered babies before. My father was in the school waiting, and when he heard the news he came running. My mother was worried about telling him he had a daughter, not a son. But he says he looked into my eyes and was delighted. Malala was a lucky girl, says Hidayatullah. When she was born, our luck changed, but not immediately. On Pakistan's 50th anniversary on 14 August 1997, there were parades and commemorations throughout the country. However, my father and his friends said there was nothing to celebrate, as Swat had only suffered since it had merged with Pakistan. They wore black armbands to protest, saying the celebrations were for nothing, and were arrested. They had to pay a fine they could not afford. A few months after I was born, the 3 rooms above the school became vacant, and we all moved in. The walls were concrete and there was running water, so it was an improvement on our muddy shack. But we were still very cramped as we were sharing it with Hidayatullah, and we almost always had guests. That first school was a mixed primary school and very small. By the time I was born, it had 5 or 6 teachers and around 100 pupils paying 100 rupees a month. My father was teacher, accountant, and principal. He also swept the floors, whitewashed the walls, and cleaned the bathrooms. He used to climb up electricity poles to hang banners advertising the school, even though he was so afraid of heights that when he got to the top of the ladder his feet shook. If the water pump stopped working, he would go down the well to repair it himself. When I saw him disappear down there, I would cry, thinking he wouldn't come back. After paying the rent and salaries, there was little money left for food. We drank green tea as we could not afford milk for regular tea. But after a while, the school started to break even, and my father began to plan a second school, which he wanted to call the Malala Education Academy. I had the run of the school as my playground. My father tells me even before I could talk, I would toddle into classes and talk as if I was a teacher. Some of the female staff, like Miss Ulfit, would pick me up and put me on their lap as if I was their pet, or even take me home with them for a while. When I was 3 or 4, I was placed in classes for much older children. I used to sit in wonder, listening to everything they were being taught. Sometimes I would mimic the teachers. You could say I grew up in a school. As my father had found with Niam, it is not easy to mix business and friendship. Eventually, Hidayatullah left to start his own school, and they divided the students, each taking 2 of the 4 years. They did not tell their pupils, as they wanted people to think the school was expanding and had 2 buildings. Though Hidayatullah and my father were not speaking at that time, Hidayatullah missed me so much he used to visit me. It was while he was visiting one afternoon in September 2001 that there was a great commotion, and other people started arriving. They said there had been a big attack on a building in New York. 2 planes had flown into it. I was only 4 and too young to understand. Even for the adults, it was hard to imagine. The biggest buildings in SWAT are the hospital and a hotel, which are 2 or 3 stories. It seemed very far away. I had no idea what New York and America were. The school was my world, and my world was the school. We did not realize then that 9/11s would change our world, too, and would bring war into our valley. The village. In our tradition, on the 7th day of a child's life, we have a celebration called Woma, which means seventh, for family, friends, and neighbors to come and admire the newborn. My parents had not held one for me because they could not afford the goat and rice needed to feed the guests, and my grandfather would not help them out because I was not a boy. When my brothers came along and Baba wanted to pay, my father refused as he hadn't done this for me. But Baba was the only grandfather I had, as my mother's father had died before I was born and we became close. My parents say I have qualities of both grandfathers, humorous and wise like my mother's father and vocal like my father's father. Baba had grown soft and white-bearded in his old age, and I loved going to visit him in the village. Whenever he saw me, he would greet me with a song, as he was still concerned about the sad meaning of my name and wanted to lend some happiness to it. Malala mewan wala da, pa tul. Jiyan ki da kashala da, he sang. Malala is of Maywind and she's the happiest person in the whole world. We always went to the village for the Eid holidays. We would dress in our finest clothes and pile into the flying coach, a minibus with brightly painted panels and jangling chains, and drive north to Barkana, our family village in Shangla. Eid happens twice a year. Eid al-Fitr, or small Eid, marks the end of the Ramadan fasting month, and Eid al-Azha, or big Eid, commemorates the Prophet Abraham's readiness to sacrifice his son Ismail to God. The dates of the feasts are announced by a special panel of clerics who watch for the appearance of the crescent moon. As soon as we heard the broadcast on the radio, we set off. The night before, we hardly slept because we were so excited. The journey usually took about 5 hours, as long as the road had not been washed away by rains or landslides, and the flying coach left early in the morning. We struggled to Mingora bus station, our bags laden with gifts for our family, embroidered shawls and boxes of rose and pistachio sweets, as well as medicine they could not get in the village. Some people took sacks of sugar and flour, and most of the baggage was tied to the top of the bus in a towering pile. Then we crammed in, fighting over the window seats even though the panes were so encrusted with dirt it was hard to see out of them. The sides of SWAT buses are painted with scenes of bright pink and yellow flowers, neon orange tigers, and snowy mountains. My brothers liked it if we got one with F-16 fighter jets or nuclear missiles, though my father said if our politicians hadn't spent so much money on building an atomic bomb, we might have had enough for schools. We drove out of the bazaar, past the grinning red mouth signs for dentists, the carts stacked with wooden cages crammed with beady-eyed white chickens with scarlet beaks, and jewelry stores with windows full of gold wedding bangles. The last few shops as we headed north out of Mingora were wooden shacks that seemed to lean on each other, in front of which were piles of reconditioned tires for the bad roads ahead. Then we were on the main road built by the last Wali, which follows the wide Swat River on the left and hugs the cliffs to the right with their emerald mines. Overlooking the river were tourist restaurants with big glass windows we had never been to. On the road we passed dusty-faced children bent double with huge bundles of grass on their backs, and men leading flocks of shaggy goats that wandered hither and thither. As we drove on, the landscape changed to paddy fields of deep lush green that smelt so fresh, and orchards of apricot and fig trees. Occasionally we passed small marble works over streams which ran milky white with the discharge of chemicals. This made my father cross. Look at what these criminals are doing to pollute our beautiful valley, he always said. The road left the river and wound up through narrow passes over steep fir-clad heights, higher and higher, until our ears popped. On top of some of the peaks were ruins where vultures circled, the remains of forts built by the first Wali. The bus strained and labored, the driver cursing as trucks overtook us on blind bends with steep drops below. My brothers loved this, and they would taunt me and my mother by pointing out the wreckage of vehicles on the mountainside. Finally, we made it up on a sky turn, the gateway to Shangla Top, a mountain pass which feels as if it's on top of the world. Up there we were higher than the rocky peaks all around us. In the far distance we could see the snows of Malam Jaba, our ski resort. By the roadside were fresh springs and waterfalls, and when we stopped for a break and to drink some tea, the air was clean and fragrant, with cedar and pine. We breathed it into our lungs greedily. Shangla is all mountain, 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 and just a small sky. After this the road winds back down for a while, then follows the Gorban River and peters out into a rocky track. The only way to cross the river is by rope bridges, or on a pulley system by which people swing themselves across in a metal box. Foreigners call them suicide bridges, but we loved them. If you look at a map of Swat, you'll see it as one long valley with little valleys we call dairy off to the sides like the branches of a tree. Our village lies about halfway along on the east. It's in the Kana Dara, which is enclosed by craggy mountain walls and so narrow there is not even room for a cricket ground. We call our village Shopper, but really there is a necklace of 3 villages along the bottom of the valley Shopper. The biggest, Barkana, where my father grew up, and Karshit, which is where my mother lived. At either end is a huge mountain Torgar, the Black Mountain to the south, and Spingar, the White Mountain, to the north. We usually stayed in Barkana at my grandfather's house, where my father grew up. Like almost all the houses in the area, it was flat-roofed and made of stone and mud. I preferred staying in Karshit with my cousins on my maternal side because they had a concrete house with a bathroom in there. Were lots of children to play with. My mother and I stayed in the women's quarters downstairs. The women spent their days looking after the children and preparing food to serve to the men in there. Hujra upstairs. I slept with my cousins Anisa and Sumbul in a room which had a clock in the shape of a mosque and a cabinet on the wall containing a rifle and some packets of hair dye. In the village the day started early, and even I, who liked to sleep late, woke with the sound of cocks crowing and the clatter of dishes as the women prepared breakfast for the men. In the morning, the sun reflected off the top of Torgar. When we got up for the Fajr prayers, the first of our 5 daily prayers, we would look left and see the golden peak of Spingar lit with the first rays of the sun like a white lady wearing a jumar tikka, a gold chain on her forehead. Often rain would then come to wash everything clean, and the clouds would linger on the green terraces of the hills where people grew radishes and walnut trees. Dotted around were hives of bees. I loved the gloopy honey, which we ate with walnuts. Down on the river at the Karshit end were water buffaloes. There was also a shed with a wooden water wheel providing power to turn huge millstones to grind wheat and maize into flour, which young boys would then pour into sacks. Next to that was a smaller shed containing a panel with a confusion of wires sprouting from it. The village received no electricity from the government, so many villagers got their power from these makeshift hydroelectric projects. As the day went on and the sun climbed higher in the sky, more and more of the White Mountain would be bathed in golden sun. Then as evening came it fell in shadow as the sun moved up the Black Mountain. We timed our prayers by the shadow on the mountains. When the sun hit a certain rock, we used to say our Asr or afternoon prayers. Then in the evening, when the white peak of Spingar was even more beautiful than in the morning, we said the Makam or evening prayers. You could see the White Mountain from everywhere, and my father told me he used to think of it as a symbol of peace for our land, a white flag at the end of our valley. When he was a child he thought this small valley was the entire world, and that if anyone went beyond the point where either mountain kissed the sky, they would fall off. Though I had been born in a city, I shared my father's love of nature. I loved the rich soil, the greenness of the plants, the crops, the buffaloes, and the yellow butterflies that fluttered about me as I walked. The village was very poor, but when we arrived our extended family would lay on a big feast. There would be bowls of chicken, rice, local spinach, and spicy mutton, all cooked over the fire by the women, followed by plates of crunchy apples, slices of yellow cake, and a big kettle of milky tea. None of the children had toys or books. The boys played cricket in a gully, and even the ball was made from plastic bags tied together with elastic bands. The village was a forgotten place. Water was carried from the spring. The few concrete houses had been built by families whose sons or fathers had gone south to work in the mines or to the Gulf from where they sent money home. There are 40 million of us Pashtuns, of which 10 million live outside our homeland. My father said it was sad that they could never return as they needed to keep working to maintain their family's new lifestyle. There were many families with no men. They would visit only once a year, and usually a new baby would arrive 9 months later. Scattered up and down the hills, there were houses made of wattle and daub, like my grandfather's, and these often collapsed when there were floods. Children sometimes froze to death in winter. There was no hospital, only Shopper had a clinic, and if anyone fell ill in the other villages they had to be carried there by their relatives on a wooden frame which we jokingly called the Shangla ambulance. If it was anything serious they would have to make the long bus journey to Mangora unless they were lucky enough to know someone with a car. Usually politicians only visited during election time. promising roads, electricity, clean water and schools, and giving money and generators to influential local people we called stakeholders, who would instruct their communities on how to vote. Of course, this only applied to the men. Women in our area don't vote. Then they disappeared off to Islamabad if they were elected to the National Assembly, or Peshawar for the Provincial Assembly, and we'd hear no more of them or their promises. My cousins made fun of me for my city ways. I did not like going barefoot. I read books and I had a different accent and used slang expressions from Mingora. My clothes were often from shops and not homemade like theirs. My relatives would ask me, "Would you like to cook chicken for us?" And I'd say, "No, the chicken is innocent. We should not kill her." They thought I was modern because I came from town. They did not realize people from Islamabad or even Peshawar would think me very backward. Sometimes we went up to the mountains and sometimes down to the river on family trips. It was a big stream, too deep and fast to cross when the snows melted in summer. The boys would fish using earthworms threaded like beads on a string hanging from a long stick. Some of them whistled, believing this would attract the fish. They weren't particularly tasty fish. Their mouths were very rough and horny. We called them chakwar tea. Sometimes a group of girls would go down to the river for a picnic with pots of rice and sherbet. Our favorite game was weddings. We would get into two groups, each supposed to be a family. Then each family would have to betroth the girl so we could perform a marriage ceremony. Everyone wanted me in their family as I was from Mingora and modern. The most beautiful girl was Tanzella, and we often gave her to the other group so we could then have her as our bride. The most important part of the mock wedding was jewelry. We took earrings, bangles, and necklaces to decorate the bride, singing Bollywood songs as we worked. Then we would put makeup on her face that we'd taken from our mothers, dip her hands in hot limestone and soda to make them white, and paint her nails red with henna. Once she was ready, the bride would start crying and we would stroke her hair and try to convince her not to worry. Marriage is part of life, we said. Be kind to your mother-in-law and father-in-law, so they treat you well. Take care of your husband and be happy. Occasionally there would be real weddings with big feasts which went on for days and left the family bankrupt or in debt. The brides would wear exquisite clothes and be draped in gold necklaces and bangles given by both sides of the family. I read that Benazir Bhutto insisted on wearing glass bangles at her wedding to set an example. But the tradition of adorning the bride still continued. Sometimes a plywood coffin would be brought back from one of the mines. The women would gather at the house of the dead man's wife or mother, and a terrible wailing would start and echo round the valley, which made my skin crawl. At night the village was very dark with just oil lamps twinkling in houses on the hills. None of the older women had any education, but they all told stories and recited what we call tapi pashto couplets. My grandmother was particularly good at them. They were usually about lover being a Pashtun. No Pashtun leaves his land of his own sweet will, she would say. Either he leaves from poverty or he leaves for love. Our aunts scared us with ghost stories, like the one about Shalgwade, the 20-fingered man, who they warned would sleep in our beds. We would cry in terror, though in fact his toe and finger in Pashto is the same. We were all 20-fingered, but we didn't realize. 2. Make us wash. Our aunts told stories about a scary woman called Shashaka, who would come after you with her muddy hands and stinking breath if you didn't take a bath or wash your hair, and turn you into a dirty woman with hair like rats' tails filled with insects. She might even kill you. In the winter, when parents didn't want their children to stay outside in the snow, they would tell the story about the lion or tiger, which must always make the first step in the snow. Only when the lion or tiger has left their footprint were we allowed to go outside. As we got older, the village began to seem boring. The only television was in the hujra of one of the wealthier families, and no one had a computer. Women in the village hid their faces whenever they left their Purta quarters and could not meet or speak to men who were not their close relatives. I wore more fashionable clothes and didn't cover my face even when I became a teenager. One of my male cousins was angry and asked my father, "Why isn't she covered?" He replied, "She's my daughter. Look after your own affairs." But some of the family thought people would gossip about us and say we were not properly following Pashtunwali. I am very proud to be a Pashtun, but sometimes I think our code of conduct has a lot to answer for, particularly where the treatment of women is concerned. A woman named Shahida, who worked for us and had 3 small daughters, told me that when she was only 10 years old, Her father had sold her to an old man who already had a wife but wanted a younger one. When girls disappeared, it was not always because they had been married off. There was a beautiful 15-year-old girl called Seema. Everyone knew she was in love with a boy, and sometimes he would pass by and she would look at him from under her long dark lashes, which all the girls envied. In our society, for a girl to flirt with any man brings shame on the family. Though it's all right for the man. We were told she had committed suicide, but we later discovered her own family had poisoned her. We have a custom called swara, by which a girl can be given to another tribe to resolve a feud. It is officially banned but still continues. In our village there was a widow called Saraya who married a widower from another clan which had a feud with her family. Nobody can marry a widow without the permission of her family. When Saraya's family found out about the union, they were furious. They threatened the widower's family until a jirga was called of village elders to resolve the dispute. The jirga decided that the widower's family should be punished by handing over their most beautiful girl to be married to the least eligible man of the rival clan. The boy was a good-for-nothing, so poor that the girl's father had to pay all their expenses. Why should a girl's life be ruined to settle a dispute she had nothing to do with? When I complained about these things to my father, he told me that life was harder for women in Afghanistan. The year before I was born, a group called the Taliban, led by a one-eyed mullah, had taken over the country and was burning girls' stools. They were forcing men to grow beards as long as a lantern and women to wear burqas. Wearing a burqa is like walking inside big fabric shuttlecock with only a grill to see through, and on hot days it's like an oven. At least I didn't have to wear one. He said that the Taliban had even banned women from laughing out loud or wearing white shoes, as white was a color that belonged to men. Women were being locked up and beaten just for wearing nail varnish. I shivered when he told me such things. I read my books like Anna Karenina and the novels of Jane Austen and trusted in my father's words. Malala is free as a bird. When I heard stories of the atrocities in Afghanistan, I felt proud to be in SWAT. Here a girl can go to school, I used to say. But the Taliban were just around the corner and were Pashtuns like us. For me, the valley was a sunny place, and I couldn't see the clouds gathering behind the mountains. My father used to say, "I will protect your freedom, Malala. Carry on with your dreams." Why I don't wear earrings and Pashtuns don't say thank you. By the age of 7, I was used to being top of my class. I was the one who would help other pupils who had difficulties. Malala is a genius girl, my class fellows would say. I was also known for participating in everything: badminton, drama, cricket, art, even singing, though I wasn't much good. So when a new girl named Malka-e-Noor joined our class, I didn't think anything of it. Her name means Queen of Light, and she said she wanted to be Pakistan's first female army chief. Her mother was a teacher at a different school, which was unusual as none of our mothers worked. To begin with, she didn't say much in class. The competition was always between me and my best friend Maniba, who had beautiful writing and presentation, which the examiners liked, but I knew I could beat her on content. So when we did the end-of-year exams and Malka-e-Noor came first, I was shocked. At home, I cried and had to be comforted by my mother. Around that time, we moved away from where we had been living on the same street as Maniba to an area where I didn't have any friends. On our new road, there was a girl called Safina, who was a bit younger than me, and we started to play together. She was a pampered girl who had lots of dolls and a shoebox full of jewelry, but she kept eyeing up the pink plastic pretend mobile phone my father had bought me, which was one of the only toys I had. My father was always talking on his mobile, so I loved to copy him and pretend to make calls on mine. One day it disappeared. A few days later, I saw Safina playing with a phone exactly the same as mine. "Where did you get that?" I asked. "I bought it in the bazaar," she said. I realize now she could have been telling the truth, but back then I thought, she is doing this to me, and I will do the same to her. I used to go to her house to study, so whenever I was there I would pocket her things, mostly toy jewelry like earrings and necklaces. It was easy. At first, stealing gave me a thrill, but that did not last long. Soon it became a compulsion. I did not know how to stop. One afternoon I came home from school and rushed into the kitchen as usual for a snack. "Hello," Bobby, I called. I'm starving. There was silence. My mother was sitting on the floor pounding. Spices, brightly colored turmeric and cumin, filling the air with their aroma. Over and over she pounded. Her eyes would not meet mine. What had I done? I was very sad and went to my room. When I opened my cupboard, I saw that all the things I had taken were gone. I had been caught. My cousin Rena came into my room. They knew you were stealing, she said. They were waiting for you to come clean. But you just kept on. I felt a terrible sinking feeling in my stomach. I walked back to my mother with my head bowed. What you did was wrong, Malala, she said. Are you trying to bring shame on us that we can't afford to buy such things? It's not true. I lied. I didn't take them. But she knew I had. Safina started it, I protested. She took the pink phone that Abba bought me. My mother was unmoved. Safina is younger than you, and you should have taught her better, she said. You should have set an example. I started crying and apologized over and over again. Don't tell Abba, I begged. I couldn't bear for him to be disappointed in me. It's horrible to feel unworthy in the eyes of your parents. It wasn't the first time. When I was little, I went to the bazaar with my mother and spotted a pile of almonds on a cart. They looked so tasty that I couldn't resist grabbing a handful. My mother told me off and apologized to the cart owner. He was furious and would not be placated. We still had little money and my mother checked her purse to see what she had. Can you sell them to me for 10 rupees? She asked. No, he replied. Almonds are very costly. My mother was very upset and told my father. He immediately went and bought the whole lot from the man and put them in a glass dish. Almonds are good, he said. If you eat them with milk just before bed, it makes you brainy. But I knew he didn't have much money, and the almonds in the dish were a reminder of my guilt. I promised myself I'd never do such a thing again. And now I had. My mother took me to say sorry to Safina and her parents. It was very hard. Safina said nothing about my phone, which didn't seem fair, but I didn't mention it either. Though I felt bad, I was also relieved it was over. Since that day, I have never lied or stolen. Not a single lie nor a single penny. Not even the coins my father leaves around the house, which we're allowed to buy snacks with. I also stopped wearing jewelry because I asked myself, what are these baubles which tempt me? Why should I lose my character for a few metal trinkets? But I still feel guilty, and to this day I say sorry to God in my prayers. My mother and father tell each other everything, so Abba soon found out why I was so sad. I could see in his eyes that I had failed him. I wanted him to be proud of me, like he was when I was presented with the first-in-year trophies at school, or the day our kindergarten teacher Miss Ulfit told him I had written only speak in Urdu on the blackboard for my classmates at the start of an Urdu lesson so we would learn the language faster. My father consoled me by telling me about the mistakes great heroes made when they were children. He told me that Mahatma Gandhi said, freedom is not worth having if it does not include the freedom to make mistakes. At school we had read stories about Muhammad Ali Jinnah. As a boy, in Karachi he would study by the glow of streetlights because there was no light at home. He told other boys to stop playing marbles in the dust and to play cricket instead, so their clothes and hands wouldn't get dirty. Outside his office, my father had a framed copy of a letter written by Abraham Lincoln to his son's teacher, translated into Pashto. It is a very beautiful letter, full of good advice. Teach him, if you can, the wonder of books. But also give him quiet time to ponder the eternal mystery of birds in the sky, bees in the sun, and the flowers on a green hillside. It says, teach him it is far more honorable to fail than to cheat. I think everyone makes a mistake at least once in their life. The important thing is what you learn from it. That's why I have problems with our Pashtunwali code. We are supposed to take revenge for wrongs done to us, but where does that end? If a man in one family is killed or hurt by another man, revenge must be exacted to restore Nang. It can be taken by killing any male member of the attacker's family. Then that family in turn must take revenge. And on it goes. There is no time limit. We have a saying, the Pashtun took revenge after 20 years, and another said it was taken too soon. We are a people of many sayings. One is the stone of Pashto does not rust in water, which means we neither forget nor forgive. That's also why we rarely say thank you, Manana, because we believe a Pashtun will never forget a good deed and is bound to reciprocate at some point, just as he will a bad one. Kindness can only be repaid with kindness. It can't be repaid with expressions like thank you. Many families live in walled compounds with watchtowers, so they can keep an eye out for their enemies. We knew many victims of feuds. One was Zaman, a man who had been in my father's class and always got better grades than him. My grandfather and uncle used to drive my father mad, teasing him. "You're not as good as Zaman," so much he once wished that rocks would come down the mountain and flatten him. But Zaman did not go to college and ended up becoming a dispenser in the village pharmacy. His family became embroiled in a dispute with their cousins over a small plot of forest. One day, as Zaman and two of his brothers were on their way to the land, they were ambushed by his uncle and some of his men. All three brothers were killed. As a respected man in the community, my father was often called on to mediate feuds. He did not believe in battle revenge and would try to make people see that neither side had anything to gain from continuing the violence, and it would be better for them to get on with their lives. There were two families in our village he could not convince. They had been locked in a feud for so long no one even seemed to remember how it had started, probably some small slight, as we are a hot-headed people. First a brother on one side would attack an uncle on the other, then vice versa. It consumed their lives. Our people say it is a good system, and our crime rate is much lower than in non-Pashtun areas. But I think that if someone kills your brother, you shouldn't kill them or their brother, you should teach them instead. I am inspired by Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the man who some call the frontier Gandhi, who introduced a non-violent philosophy to our culture. It's the same with stealing. Some people, like me, get caught and vow they will never do it again. Others say, "Oh, it's no big deal, it was just a little thing." But the second time they will steal something bigger, and the third something bigger still. In my country, too many politicians think nothing of stealing. They are rich and we are a poor country, yet they loot and loot. Most of them don't pay tax, but that's the least of it. They take out loans from state banks, but they don't pay them back. They get kickbacks on government contracts from friends or the companies they award them to. Many of them own expensive flats in London. I don't know how they can live with their consciences when they see our people going hungry or sitting in the darkness of endless power cuts, or children unable to go to school as their parents need them to work. My father says that Pakistan has been cursed with more than its fair share of politicians who only think about money. They don't care if the army is actually flying the plane. They are happy to stay out of the cockpit and sit in business class, close the curtains and enjoy the fine food and service, while the rest of us are squashed in economy. I had been born into a sort of democracy in which for 10 years Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif kept replacing each other, none of their governments ever completing a term and always accusing each other of corruption. But 2 years after I was born, the generals again took over. It happened in a manner so dramatic that it sounds like something out of a movie. Nawaz Sharif was prime minister at the time and had fallen out with his army chief General Pervez Musharraf and sacked him. At the time, General Musharraf was on a plane of our national airline PIA, coming back from Sri Lanka. Nawaz Sharif was so worried about his reaction that he tried to stop the plane from landing in Pakistan. He ordered Karachi airport to switch off its landing lights and to park fire engines on the runway to block the plane, even though it had 200 other passengers on board and not enough fuel to get to another country. Within an hour of the announcement on television of Musharraf's sacking, tanks were on the streets and troops had taken over the newsrooms and the airports. The local commander, General Iftikhar, stormed the control tower at Karachi so that Musharraf's plane could land. Musharraf then seized power and threw Sharif into a dungeon in Attic Fort. Some people celebrated by handing out sweets as Sharif was unpopular, but my father cried when he heard the news. He had thought we were done with military dictatorships. Sharif was accused of treason and only saved by his friends in the Saudi royal family, who arranged his exile. Musharraf was our fourth military ruler. Like all our dictators, he started by addressing the nation on TV, beginning, "Mir Aziz Hamwatano, my dear countrymen," then went into a long tirade against Sharif, saying that under him Pakistan had lost our honor, dignity and respect. He vowed to end corruption and go after those guilty of plundering and looting the national wealth. He promised he would make his own assets and tax return public. He said he would only run the country for a short time, but no one believed him. General Zia had promised to be in power for 90 days and had stayed more than 11 years until he was killed in an air crash. It's the same old story, my father said, and he was right. Musharraf promised to end the old feudal system by which the same few dozen families controlled our entire country and bring fresh young, clean faces into politics. Instead, his cabinet was made up of the very same old faces. Once again, our country was expelled from the Commonwealth and became an international black sheep. The Americans had already suspended most aid the year before when we conducted nuclear tests, but now, almost everyone boycotted us. With such a history, you can see why the people of Swat did not always think it was a good idea to be part of Pakistan. Every few years, Pakistan sent us a new deputy commissioner, or DC, to govern Swat, just as the British had done in colonial days. It seemed to us that these bureaucrats came to our province simply to get rich, then went back home. They had no interest in developing Swat. Our people are used to being subservient because under the Wali no criticism was tolerated. If anyone offended him, their entire family could be expelled from Swat. So when the DCs came from Pakistan, they were the new kings, and no one questioned them. Older people often looked back nostalgically to the days of the last Wali. Back then, they said, the mountains were all still covered in trees. There were schools every 5 kilometers, and the Wali Sahib would visit them in person to resolve problems. After what happened with Safina, I vowed that I would never treat a friend badly again. My father always says it's important to treat friends well. When he was at college and had no money for food or books, many of his friends helped him out, and he never forgot that. I have 3 good friends: Safina from my area, Sumbul from the village, and Maniba from school. Maniba had become my best friend in primary school when we lived near each other, and I persuaded her to come to our school. She is a wise girl, though we often fall out, particularly when we go on school trips. She comes from a large family with 3 sisters and 4 brothers. I think of her as my big sister, even though I am 6 months older than her. Maniba sets down rules which I try to follow. We don't have secrets from each other, and we don't share our secrets with anyone else. She doesn't like me talking to other girls and says, we must be careful of associating with people who are badly behaved or have a reputation for trouble. She always says, I have 4 brothers, and if I do even the slightest thing wrong, they can stop me going to school. I was so eager not to disappoint my parents that I ran errands for anyone. One day our neighbors asked me to buy some maize for them from the bazaar. On the way, a boy on a bicycle crashed into me, and my left shoulder hurt so much that my eyes watered. But I still went and bought the maize, took it to my neighbors, and then went home. Only then did I cry. Shortly after that, I found the perfect way to try to win back the respect of my father. Notices had gone up at school for a public speaking competition, and Maniba and I both decided to enter. I remembered the story of my father surprising my grandfather and longed to do the same. When we got the topic, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was honesty is the best policy. The only practice we'd had was reading out poems at morning assembly. But there was an older girl at school called Fatima who was a very good speaker. She was beautiful and spoke in an animated way. She could speak confidently in front of hundreds of people, and they would hang on her every word. Maniba and I longed to be like her and studied her carefully. In our culture, speeches are usually written by our fathers, uncles, or teachers. They tend to be in English or Urdu, not in our native Pashto. We thought speaking in English meant you were more intelligent. We were wrong, of course. It does not matter what language you choose, the important thing is the words you use to express yourself. Maniba's speech was written by one of her older brothers. She quoted beautiful poems by Allama Iqbal, our national poet. My father wrote my speech. In it, he argued that if you want to do good, but do it in a bad way, that's still bad. In the same way, if you choose a good method to do something bad, it's still bad. He ended it with Lincoln's words, it is far more honorable to fail than to cheat. On the day, only 8 or 9 boys and girls turned up. Maniba spoke well. She was very composed, and her speech was more emotional and poetic than mine, though mine might have had the better message. I was so nervous before the speech. I was trembling with fear. My grandfather had come to watch, and I knew he really wanted me to win the competition, which made me even more nervous. I remembered what my father had said about taking a deep breath before starting. But then I saw that all eyes were on me, and I rushed through. I kept losing my place as the pages danced in my shaking hands. But as I ended with Lincoln's words, I looked up at my father. He was smiling. When the judges announced the results at the end, Maniba had won. I came second. It didn't matter. Lincoln also wrote in the letter to his son's teacher, teach him how to gracefully Lose. I was used to coming top of my class, but I realized that even if you win 3 or 4 times, the next victory will not necessarily be yours without trying. And also that sometimes it's better to tell your own story. I started writing my own speeches and changing the way I delivered them from my heart rather than from a sheet of paper.